Hey everyone, welcome back to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. It's Marie Hopkinson here. Today we're talking about the difference between spleen Qi deficiency and spleen blood deficiency. Can one lead to the other? This was a subscriber's question on the channel. I'm going to talk a bit slower because I know there's a lot of Americans listening and they always ask me to speak a bit slower. If you're studying Chinese medicine or you're thinking about studying it, your first year student, you would have probably used a book like this. Now it's been updated since now. This is the old Giovanni Foundations of Chinese Medicine, so it looks a bit better than this. Or it looks different to this. Don't know if it's better, but Chinese medicine doesn't actually change. It's just people write more books or different versions to probably make more money or to elaborate on what they've already said. But if you've got this old version, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with this. So it talks about the different organs in Chinese medicine, the 5 element organs, and what their functions are. Now, I actually did a series on this a while back for students, so it's called Chinese Medicine Study Buddy. So if you're interested in learning more and more about it, you can go and just sort of think, what are the functions of the spleen, the stomach, the liver, and all the rest of it. I'm going to sort of draw on here the 5 elements. So we have wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, right? So wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. So coming back to the original question, can spleen Qi deficiency lead to blood deficiency or vice versa? The answer is yes, either one could lead to the other. And I'm going to show you how that could happen. And it's actually really common for certain types of people to get one or the other thing because of your constitutional makeup and also because of the differences between male and female. So there's got to be a bigger strain on your body in terms of blood if you're a female because you have a menstrual cycle, just because of that, because you're going to be creating blood and your life is more about blood than a man's life. So you have more of an opportunity through difficulties or abnormalities through the menstrual cycle to have blood deficiency because just having a regular cycle, a normal cycle, and having a couple of kids isn't going to deplete you in blood. But every time you try for a baby or you have a baby, there's always more chance that something else could go wrong. And most people who've had a few kids have had other things happen. They might have had a miscarriage, they might have had excessive bleeding and stuff like that. So that taxes your body more in terms of blood. So for the most part, women tend to get blood deficient much more commonly than men. It doesn't mean that men can't get blood deficient. And I do have a video on how you could get blood deficient. That's a whole other video, so maybe check that out as well. So before we get into the details too much of this, let's just go back to these 5 elements. So wood, they have a cycle of interacting with each other. And these elements represent the organs in our body, which in turn are related to blood in different ways and related to qi. So most people in Chinese medicine world are familiar with spleen qi or spleen qi deficiency, right? So that would generally fit into the earth category. So I've written that over here. And blood deficiency, sometimes we write it like this term Xu Shu, blood Shu means deficiency in Chinese language. Different books use different terms. Bob Flores, for instance, would call it vacuity, or some other books call it vacuity. It's not a very common word used in the English language. Deficiency can sort of imply different things than the XU. So that's why in this video I'm making it just a little bit more towards people who are learning Chinese medicine rather than just people who are patients of Chinese medicine. Because why not? Why not go there? So I hope it's not too in-depth for you in terms of too much unnecessary, unwanted information. So how does this happen? Generally with spleen Qi deficiency, the symptoms would be things like bloating, a poor appetite, or something related to your appetite. So in most TCM books like this one and whatnot, they say poor appetite. And when I was learning Chinese medicine, I never really knew what they meant by that because as a Westerner, we don't use that terminology much. I don't have a good appetite. People just don't go around saying that as commonly. But that category of things can relate to things like just any inability to eat properly, really. Like you eat something and then you just feel very full really quickly, or you eat something and you feel bloated. You don't have an appetite, literally poor appetite. Like you don't feel hungry for things. And this commonly happens when you're sick with a cold or a flu. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, when you've been really sick and you kind of are just recovering from that illness, and maybe you've had a few days of a fever or something like that, and you just feel like, I don't even feel like eating anything, until one day you just feel like, oh wow, I'm so hungry again. My appetite has come back. That's a mechanism that your body does naturally to protect you. And that's good in that circumstance, because you don't want to bombard your digestive system with food at that time when it's trying to, push out its response to a virus or whatever that cold or flu response is, influenza maybe, something like that. That's good in that circumstance, but it's not it's not good in other circumstances where you just, why don't you have good appetite? Now, why is that happening in this pattern? It's actually because your earth element, or your spleen and stomach, can't capacitate food. Like, their job is to do digestion, but if they're so weak or deficient, any food is just like another bombardment to it. So it sort of goes, oh, I can't handle that, it's too hard. And also, this area of poor appetite can extend to things like not being able to eat certain foods, like certain, not being able to eat gluten, or not being able to eat lactose, or like intolerances, I should say, intolerances to food. So you could eat it, but you don't feel good on it, that kind of stuff. So this has got to do with how strong your body is, and also how toxic the thing is you're eating. I'm coming to more and more of a realization that there's a lot more problems with our food supply, incrementally ongoing, than we've ever had before. And so there's lots of things where in Chinese medicine they would recommend you eat that, but you notice that people have a lot of problems on those kinds of foods, more than they should have. And I think that's to do with pesticides, GMOs, things like that you are just embedded in the food supply now, whereas they weren't always the case, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So aside from getting down and dirty into that, that's spleen qi deficiency. And a big component of spleen qi deficiency is it's an effect on your bowels. And technically in most TCM books they say diarrhea or looser stools, not like anything that's getting onto the looser side, means that your body doesn't have enough qi or yang to kind of form the stool properly, and so then it comes out looser, right? Now, your body may have a response to something that you've eaten, like if you've ever had food poisoning, and it just has like diarrhea to sort of release that. So it's a natural mechanism that your body has got there for a purpose. But if it's happening all the time, then that's not really serving a purpose. It's like, well, something's irritating your body, or it's irritating your gut that you're eating. And this is where people might go into like some kind of elimination diet, or these kinds of things to kind of work out, well, what is it? Is it something I'm eating? But it also could be just the strength of your digestive system that has been damaged. The qi, the spleen qi, has been damaged from previous things that you've kind of done to it. And then there's also the category of people that don't want to change their lifestyle. They enjoy eating those foods, and they just kind of put up with those symptoms, or don't really notice those symptoms, or their body is so robust that they don't get those symptoms until much further down the track. And that's what I mean by it's been damaged. So they might have been doing things that they didn't realise were a problem. They weren't a problem at the time. So your spleen qi definitely has those kind of bowel symptoms that blood deficiency sort of doesn't have. So it's mostly looser. But there are forms of constipation which is kind of a diarrhea in itself as well. Like there can be patients that can't go for a few days, but then when they do go, it's like loose and just like an irritable bowel syndrome kind of situation, that sort of stuff. So I would place lots of those kinds of things into that spleen qi deficiency sort of category if you're thinking about it from TCM. So if even with the classical Chinese medicine, we still think of the earth, or the earth relating to Tai Yin, right? So earth, Tai Yin and Yang Ming. So your stomach is the Yang Ming, and that's your stomach and your large intestine. And then also part of earth is the spleen, Tai Yin, and part of metal, the lung, Tai Yin. So and metal is the large intestine. So there's a relationship between earth and metal through those two organs. That's what I meant by I might get a bit a bit in detail now. So if you're just a patient, don't worry about that. If you don't need to worry about what's this Tai Yin Yang Ming thing. Don't bother your brain too much with that. So what I'm getting at is, how can this lead to it? Well, your body, to make blood, it relies on the earth. Another scenario of these 5 elements is actually putting them in this sequence here that I'm going to draw now, where the earth is actually in the center. And we're going to draw the things like, so your wood, fire, metal, water, and these things are actually just going in and out of each other. And it's this is called the cosmological cycle, and so forth, right, like that, where there's this flow between the earth that's going, that's where your resource comes from. So you can only get energy from really two ways to get energy. One is through the breath, and the other is through your diet, your digestion. So you get oxygen, right, and that helps you make qi or yang, and you get food, and that helps you make qi or yang. And then out of that, your body makes blood. It makes the components of blood. So when we say blood deficiency, what does that mean? Does it mean you have less blood? No. So even if you lose blood, your body's going to try to make up that volume of blood fairly quickly with fluid, right? So it will just be like diluted. Like if you go and give blood, as soon as you've given blood, your body's recognizing, oh, there's less volume of blood here, so we need to put more fluid in there. And over time that replenishes back, right? But the cells in your blood are made, right? So your red blood cells, your white blood cells, all the different parts and components of blood, it needs to be made. And that's what TCM refers to when they think about blood deficiency, is the components of the blood. So you could go and have a blood test and test those things, but in Chinese medicine, in the Han dynasty, they didn't have those kinds of things, they didn't have blood tests. They still recognised that people could have these symptoms. Not everyone who has a pattern of TCM blood deficiency has anemia, but it's a very common association, right? The concept of blood deficiency doesn't mean you have anemia, but people who have anemia are generally going to be classified as blood deficient in Chinese medicine, because that's like a known disorder, a disease where there's a problem with the red blood cells. So there's not enough of them, or they're misshapen or things like that, so they can't do their job of oxygenating your body properly. So that's where blood comes in. And we'll just go back to this other part of it. So you can get blood deficient directly from being qi deficient. So how that would happen is a person would sort of, let's say they're fairly normal, they start eating a very terrible diet, or, just something that taxes their body in some way. And they aren't able to recover from that enough, so that then suddenly they had bloating, they had diarrhea or loose stools, or maybe not even the loose stools yet. They might just feel bloated and a bit of a poor appetite. Tiredness can be part of spleen qi deficiency, and particularly craving sweet foods is another big symptom of it. So like you eat a meal and then you crave sweet after that meal. That happens, and then over time something then happens with your menstrual cycle. So if some irregularity happens to the cycle, it might be like really long periods, not enough bleeding, amenorrhea, like no period at all, that's amenorrhea. A whole bunch of different things could happen there. So that would be sort of a deficiency of the earth element, or the spleen qi deficiency leading to, well, we would call it liver blood deficiency. So over here on the wood side, you have your liver, you have your gallbladder. And for this scenario, we're not really thinking about the gallbladder too much. We're mostly thinking about the liver. And one of the jobs of the liver is it's said to store blood. What does that mean? So it's replenishing blood. And when do you do this? And this is the other key concept of health in Chinese medicine. I'm just going to jot these down here. So we've had breathing, we've had diet, or food and drink, and we've got now sleep. And this is another place where you could start off to get blood deficient, and then that could lead to qi deficiency. So we've firstly, we've got spleen Qi deficiency. It's usually going to be diet related, and it can be pretty nuanced and varied for people. Like something that, like I said before, some people can have this sort of robust energy that they're born with, and they can tolerate a whole bunch of stuff that another person would get spleen Qi deficient fairly quickly from. So that in itself is the main way you get spleen Qi deficiency. It's through your diet. The blood deficiency happens through a few ways. So it could happen through that diet. So your body just doesn't have the nutrients to make the blood out of. Now, one of the main diet ways that this will happen is, unfortunately, veganism or vegetarianism over a long period of time. And particularly if a vegan or a vegetarian eats a lot of cold and raw as the main part of their diet. So a person who's like a juice fast person, they may not actually get a lot of spleen Qi deficiency symptoms, but they may just jump more into the blood deficiency symptoms much more quicker. That might be the first thing that they notice, right? I'm not going to get into the why of that, but it might not show up until they suddenly don't have a regular cycle, or they have trouble falling pregnant or something like that. And then they have to go and investigate things to do with their menstrual cycle, things like that. So that's the blood. Now, the other way blood can get deficient by itself, independent of the spleen Qi, would be things like losing blood, like having an accident, having a surgery, losing a lot of blood in a surgery, something like that, through the menstrual cycle. So sometimes people have a menstrual cycle that doesn't stop, like they have prolonged bleeding, so they could have bleeding for months and months on end, or they could just have periods that are very heavy. So not one heavy period isn't going to do this, but if you have regular heavy periods that do this. Too many periods close together, so some people have a cycle which is every 2 weeks and they seem to be getting a period, that kind of stuff. So some taxation of blood. And the other way that's much, much more common and probably not noticed as much is sleep. So when you sleep, you are replenishing blood. You're tonifying your blood. In a Western medicine sense, you're filtering your blood through your liver, right? As in, it's taking the toxins out of your body and it's getting ready to kind of, rejuvenate for the next day. And it's also part of your sleep. I'm just going to put sleep here, over here, because it kind of has this dual effect of it affects everything, but it affects your mind, which is over here, your shen, or your mind. That's a fire aspect. So it's allowing your mind to rest. So you're not thinking and thinking. And this is why in Chinese medicine they place dreams or dream disturbed sleep particularly as a type of insomnia or a type of not great, that's not good, that's not considered perfect, good, great, restful sleep. So, all these elements are actually affected in some way, but sleep kind of, it tonifies blood. One bad night of sleep isn't going to affect you with blood deficiency, but lots of bad nights of sleep will. And if that's happening at the same time as your diet isn't great, so over here something's going on here with your earth element, then or you're taxing your body in another way. So you might be drinking a lot of alcohol that you normally wouldn't have. And you're also really stressed about something, and so you're thinking about that at night, and you can't sleep properly because you're overthinking that. You might have had a breakup or some kind of like emotional thing happen. It's kind of common for this to happen, to disturb your sleep. I'm not saying it's normal or it's good, but it's a common thing that happens, that your sleep would be disturbed. And having that happen once in a blue moon, once every so often, isn't going to be too detrimental to you. But if that's happening on the overall, then that's going to definitely affect your body's ability to store blood and tonify blood. Recently, I learned of a friend who's overseas had passed away, and it was really sad, and I was very upset to hear that news. And then that next night, I just could not sleep very well, and I have really good sleep normally. I just put my head on the pillow and off you go. And so that was disturbing to me that I couldn't sleep for almost that whole night. And I wasn't sort of thinking about it actively, but I knew that that was the reason. And then my sleep just kind of got back to normal after that. But it's happened to me a few times where there's been something very stressful in my life happen, and then that's going to disturb your sleep. Or people have dreams about it as a psychological process to process through something. So I wouldn't worry yourself, because worry in itself is also another thing that affects you. Everything affects you. So worry affects the earth element a lot. And that's another thing I should probably mention that can lead to spleen qi deficiency if we're thinking about emotional stuff. It would have to be quite a lot of worry, but the problem with worry is it mostly affects people's eating habits in some way. So it's kind of a compounded effect. Like, are they worrying and then eating a not so great diet because of the thing you're worrying about, and you're using the food as a compensatory thing? That's a very common thing. But there are some people that are just worriers, worry. And in Chinese medicine, we say that knots your spleen qi, knots your spleen energy. So I hope this has been a bit useful and helpful to sort of show you how those two things can interrelate. Once you have those two patterns going on, if a Chinese medicine practitioner sees that, they can generally treat both things at once, because they're both deficiency. So they're going to try to tonify your body and tonify blood and tonify qi, or in a classical Chinese medicine sense, these are very much linked together, how the formulas would treat them. And it would be more like warming the gut, warming the spleen and the earth element, and at the same time having a formula that restores that ability to sleep, and then that in itself is going to help tonify blood. If there was bleeding, we would use a formula or a treatment strategy to stop the bleeding. I've had a few patients like that have had bleeding, like actively bleeding, like heavy periods or long amounts of menstrual bleeding that shouldn't be happening. And the priority there is to use a formula that's just going to work to stop that bleeding first off. And often the way that we do that is through a tonification. So it's basically tonifying to help the body hold the blood in there. Another symptom that can happen from blood deficiency is bleeding in itself. So blood being deficient, and in TCM they call this the spleen qi sort of holding or raising effect, and people can get prolapses or things going down. Prolapses is the best word for it. So it could be a prolapsed uterus or hernias or things like that, because of this inability to hold. And that's kind of like what's happening with the diarrhea or the looser stools. It's like inability to hold things in, and they're just kind of coming out. So when you've got blood deficiency with that, the holding effect can happen on the blood, and the bleeding, like some people can easily get blood noses, or they easily bleed, or if they have a bleeding disorder, they can, hemophilia, for instance, like easy bleeding. And TCM would see that as like an inability to hold the blood, if there's a knock or something, because they don't have the platelets. Like that's a type of a blood deficiency, right? It's not, your body's not producing something it needs, so that if it was to encounter an accident, it couldn't just stop the bleeding. So yeah, this is a kind of more of a tutorial kind of one today. And if you're enjoying the channel, make sure you subscribe, like, and share the show if you want to. You can do that. But I really like people's comments. So if you've got a comment, you've got something you'd like to say, you've got a question that you want to ask about Chinese medicine, feel free to ask that in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer it. I have enjoyed making these videos, and I hope to make more of them, time permitting. I keep saying I'm going to do this and that, and then I don't end up doing it because of the time. So yeah, this has been a good one to make. So this is, can spleen qi deficiency lead to blood deficiency, and vice versa? Hopefully this has answered the question how that can happen. And if you want to know what you can do about it, go and see your Chinese medicine practitioner to get started on treatment, and then you can watch some of the videos that I've got on blood deficiency. There's lots of videos about that, spleen qi deficiency, and I've got diet things and lifestyle stuff that you can do for those things. But think about this, it's very simple, it's not hard. Your breathing, your sleep, and your diet. Like those three things are key for both qi and blood. And if you can get those things right, you can improve upon them. Even if you just focus on your sleep and you can improve upon your sleep, a huge amount of benefit will come to you from that from in your health. All right, have a great week and see you again on another video soon. Thank you.